The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1883, and Penelope Richardson held it with trembling hands as she stood in the doorway of her modest home in Casa Grande, Arizona, reading the words that would shatter her world into 1,000 pieces. Her husband Thomas had been gone for 3 months, chasing rumors of gold strikes in the mountains north of Phoenix, promising he would return with enough wealth to build them the life they had always dreamed about. Instead, his letter contained only a handful of crumpled bills and a confession that cut deeper than any knife. He had found gold, more than he had ever imagined, and he had also found someone else, a saloon girl named Delilah who made him feel young and alive in ways he claimed Penelope never could. He was not coming back. The money, he wrote, should be enough to see her through until she could figure out what to do next. Penelope was 24 years old, and she had never felt more alone in her entire life. She stood there on the sun-baked porch, watching the dust devils dance across the desert landscape, feeling the hot Arizona wind pull at her dark brown hair. The money in her hand amounted to maybe 3 months of living expenses if she was careful. After that, she had no idea what she would do. Casa Grande was a small town, barely more than a collection of buildings clustered around the railroad tracks that connected Tucson to Phoenix. Opportunities for women on their own were scarce, and respectable ones were even rarer. She walked back inside and sat at the kitchen table, spreading the bills out in front of her. $23. That was what 6 years of marriage was worth to Thomas. $23 and a letter full of excuses. She felt the tears coming, but pushed them back. Crying would not solve anything. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out how she was going to survive in a place that had little patience for abandoned wives. The sound of hoofbeats outside made her look up. Through the window, she could see a rider approaching, tall in the saddle, leading a pack horse behind him. He stopped in front of her neighbor's house, the widow Mrs. Chen, who took in laundry and mending to make ends meet. Penelope watched as the man dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years spent on horseback. He was lean and weathered, wearing a dusty brown hat pulled low over his face. And when he turned slightly, she caught a glimpse of dark hair and a strong jawline shadowed with several days of stubble. Mrs. Chen came out to greet him, and Penelope could hear the murmur of their voices, but could not make out the words. The man handed over what looked like a bundle of clothing, and Mrs. Chen nodded enthusiastically, taking the items inside. The rider tipped his hat to her and began to mount up again, but then Mrs. Chen called out something and pointed directly at Penelope's house. Penelope felt her heart skip. What was the old woman saying? She watched as the rider turned his head to look at her home, then nodded slowly. He walked his horses over, and Penelope stood up quickly, smoothing her simple calico dress and checking that her hair was not completely disheveled. By the time he knocked on her door, she had composed herself enough to open it without her hands shaking too badly. Up close, he was younger than she had first thought, maybe 30 at most, with striking blue eyes that seemed to hold both kindness and a deep weariness. He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that needed a trim. "Madam, my name is Xander Novak," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you might have a room to let. I am looking for a place to stay for a while, somewhere quiet where I can rest my horses and do some work. I can pay fair rent, and I would not be any trouble." Penelope blinked, caught off guard. Rent a room? She had never considered such a thing. The house had 2 bedrooms, and she certainly was not using the second one anymore. The money would be helpful, desperately helpful, but the idea of having a strange man living under her roof made her hesitate. "I am not sure that would be appropriate," she said carefully. "I am a woman alone here, and people talk." Xander nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. "I understand your concern, madam. I am a ranch hand just passing through, looking for steady work. I have been on the trail for 2 weeks, and I would just like a clean bed and a roof over my head for a spell. I can provide references if you need them. I worked for the Triple Bar Ranch outside of Prescott for 3 years before moving on." Something in his straightforward manner put her at ease, or perhaps it was simply the desperation of her situation. She needed money, and he was offering it. She glanced past him at his horses. They were well cared for, their tack clean and in good repair. That said something about a man, how he treated his animals. "How much were you thinking to pay?" she asked. $5 a week for the room and breakfast. I will take my other meals in town." $5 a week. That would cover her immediate needs and then some. She made a decision that would change everything. "The room is small and I expect it kept clean," she said. "No drinking in the house and no visitors. I serve breakfast at 7 in the morning, and if you are not there, that is your loss. I will not hold food for you." A slight smile crossed his face, softening the hard lines around his mouth. "That sounds more than fair, madam. I appreciate your trust." "I have not decided to trust you yet, Mr. Novak," she said, though without real bite. "I have decided to take a calculated risk. There is a difference." "A wise distinction," he said. "When can I move in?" "This afternoon, I suppose. Give me a few hours to prepare the room." He nodded, replaced his hat, and turned to go. Then he paused and looked back at her. "Mrs. Chen mentioned your husband recently left. I am sorry for your trouble. A man who would abandon his wife is no kind of man at all." Before Penelope could respond, he was walking back to his horses, leaving her standing in the doorway with a strange warmth spreading through her chest. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with simple kindness, without judgment or pity. She watched him ride away toward the center of town, then went inside to prepare the spare room, pushing aside the complicated feelings that were beginning to stir. The room had been used for storage since Thomas left, filled with trunks and boxes of things they had accumulated over the years. Penelope spent the next 3 hours cleaning it out, sweeping the floors, washing the windows, and putting fresh linens on the narrow bed. She found an old dresser in the shed out back and dragged it inside, nearly throwing out her back in the process. By the time Xander returned with his belongings, the room looked presentable, if sparse. He carried in a worn leather saddlebag and a bedroll, setting them down with care. "This is fine, madam. Better than I have had in months. Thank you. There is a basin for washing, and I heat water on the stove if you need a bath," she said, feeling awkward discussing such personal matters with a stranger. "The privy is out back." "I will take you up on that bath tomorrow morning, if the offer stands," he said. "Right now, I just need to tend to my horses and maybe get some rest. There is a lean-to behind the house where you can stable them. It is not much, but it will keep them out of the sun." Over the next few days, they established a careful routine. Xander was up before dawn, tending to his horses and then disappearing into town for most of the day. He returned in the evenings, always polite, always keeping a respectful distance. He was true to his word about being no trouble. Penelope found herself listening for the sound of his return, and she could not quite explain why. On the 4th morning, as she served him breakfast, eggs and cornbread with butter, he asked her a question that caught her off guard. "What are you planning to do, Mrs. Richardson, if you do not mind my asking?" She set down the coffee pot and looked at him. "About what?" "About your situation. A woman alone needs some way to support herself. Have you thought about what comes next?" The directness of the question should have offended her, but instead, she found it refreshing. Everyone else in town had either ignored her situation or whispered about it behind her back. No one had simply asked. "I have been thinking about taking in sewing," she admitted. "I am good with a needle, and there are plenty of men in this town who need their clothes mended, but I am not sure if it will be enough." Xander nodded thoughtfully, chewing his food. "That is honest work. There is also the hotel in town. They are always looking for help with the laundry and cleaning. The pay is not great, but it is steady." "How do you know they are hiring?" "I asked around, figured you might need some options." Something in her chest tightened. He had been asking around on her behalf, this stranger who had been living under her roof for less than a week. "Why would you do that?" He looked at her directly, those blue eyes serious. "Because you took a chance on me when you did not have to. Because I know what it is like to be alone and trying to figure out how to keep going. And because it is the right thing to do." Penelope sat down across from him, forgetting propriety for a moment. "Where are you from, Mr. Novak?" "Call me Xander, please. And I am from all over, I suppose. My parents had a small farm in Kansas, but we lost it during the drought in '74. They both died that winter. I have been moving around ever since, working ranches, doing odd jobs. I go where the work is." "That sounds lonely." "It can be," he admitted. "But there is a kind of freedom in it, too. No ties, no expectations, just you and the land and whatever tomorrow brings." "Is that what you want, to keep moving forever?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I used to think so. Lately, I am not so sure anymore." The conversation lingered in Penelope's mind long after Xander left for the day. She found herself thinking about him as she went about her chores, wondering what had really brought him to Casa Grande and why he seemed content to stay when he had talked about always moving on. That afternoon, she walked into town to inquire at the hotel about work. The owner, a gruff man named Mr. Henderson, looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. "You the one whose husband ran off chasing gold?" he asked bluntly. "I am," she said, lifting her chin. "And I'm looking for honest work to support myself. I understand you need help with laundry." "I do, but I need someone reliable, someone who is going to show up every day and work hard, not someone who is going to fall apart or run off with the first man who smiles at them." The insult stung, but Penelope refused to let it show. "I am more reliable than any man who breaks his vows, Mr. Henderson. Give me a chance to prove it." Something in her tone must have impressed him, because he nodded slowly. "Fine. You can start tomorrow. 6 in the morning. The work is hard, and the pay is $3 a week. Take it or leave it." "I will take it." She walked out of the hotel feeling a strange mixture of pride and exhaustion. $3 a week, plus the 5 from Xander, would give her enough to live on, at least for now. It was not the life she had imagined when she married Thomas, but it was something. It was survival. When she told Xander about the job that evening, he smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "That is good news. You will do well there. Thank you for suggesting it," she said. "I might not have thought to ask if you had not mentioned it. You would have figured it out on your own eventually. You strike me as a woman who does what needs to be done." The compliment warmed her in a way she had not expected. She realized she was staring at him and quickly looked away, busying herself with clearing the dishes. But she could feel his gaze on her, thoughtful and assessing, and it made her skin tingle with an awareness she had not felt in years. The work at the hotel was every bit as hard as Mr. Henderson had promised. Penelope spent her days bent over steaming tubs of water, scrubbing sheets and towels until her hands were raw and her back ached. But she showed up every morning and worked until the job was done, and gradually Mr. Henderson's suspicious scowls turned into grudging nods of approval. The other women who worked there, mostly Mexican and Chinese immigrants, were kind to her once they realized she was not going to put on airs or complain about the work. They taught her tricks for getting stains out and shared their lunches with her when she forgot to bring her own. Xander had found work too, at a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. He rode out before dawn and returned at dusk, tired and dusty, but seemingly content. Their evenings fell into a comfortable pattern. Penelope would have dinner ready, and they would eat together, sharing details of their days. She found herself looking forward to these meals, to the sound of his voice and the way he listened when she talked, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. One evening in October, about 6 weeks after Xander had moved in, a storm rolled across the desert. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and rain pounded against the roof in a steady drumming that made conversation difficult. They sat in the small parlor, Penelope mending a shirt by lamplight while Xander cleaned his tack. The intimacy of the scene was not lost on either of them. "Tell me about your husband," Xander said suddenly. "What was he like before he left?" Penelope's hands stilled on the fabric. No one had asked her that. They had asked about the leaving, about the gold, about how she was managing, but no one had asked about Thomas himself. "He was charming when we met," she said slowly, "full of big dreams and promises. My father did not approve of him, said he was too much of a dreamer, not practical enough. But I was 18 and thought I knew better. We married against my father's wishes, and he never spoke to me again. He died 2 years later, and I never got the chance to make peace with him. That must have been hard." "It was, but I thought I had Thomas, thought we were building something together. For a while, it was good. He worked as a clerk in a general store, and we saved what we could. But he was always restless, always convinced that something better was just around the corner. When the rumors of gold strikes started circulating, I could see the fever take hold of him. I begged him not to go, but he would not listen. He said he was doing it for us, but I think he was really doing it for himself. And he found gold? According to his letter, yes. Enough to make him feel like a rich man, I suppose. Enough to make him forget about the wife waiting for him back home." She could not keep the bitterness from her voice. Xander set down the bridle he had been working on and looked at her directly. "Then he was a fool. Gold is just metal. It can be spent or lost or stolen. But a woman who would stand by you through hard times, who would build a life with you, That is worth more than all the gold in California." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Penelope felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You really believe that?" "I do. I have seen men chase fortune all my life, and I have never seen one who ended up happy because of it. The happiest people I have known were the ones who had someone to come home to, someone who mattered more than anything else." "Is that what you want? Someone to come home to?" He held her gaze, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. "I am starting to think it might be." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger. Penelope knew she should look away, should change the subject, should remember that her husband had only been gone for a few months and that proper mourning for a marriage, even a failed one, took time. But she could not bring herself to break the connection. Something was growing between them, had been growing since the day he knocked on her door, and denying it was becoming harder every day. The storm raged outside, but inside, the small house felt warm and safe, a shelter from more than just the weather. When Xander finally looked away, returning to his work, Penelope felt the loss of his attention like a physical thing. She bent over her mending, but her hands were shaking slightly and she had to set it down before she pricked her finger. "I should check on the horses," Xander said, standing up. "Make sure the lean-to is holding up in this wind." "Be careful," she said, the words coming out more tender than she had intended. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I will." After he left, Penelope sat alone in the lamplight, listening to the rain and trying to understand what was happening to her. She had been so angry at Thomas, so hurt and betrayed. Part of her still was. But another part, a part that was growing stronger every day, was beginning to feel something else entirely. Gratitude, maybe, that he had left. Relief that she was free from a marriage that had been dying long before he rode away. And something new, something she was afraid to name, directed at the quiet man who had walked into her life and treated her with more respect and kindness than her own husband ever had. When Xander came back inside, soaked to the skin despite his oilskin coat, she insisted he change into dry clothes and sit by the stove to warm up. She made him hot coffee and watched as he wrapped his hands around the mug, his hair dripping water onto his shoulders. "The horses are fine," he said. "The lean-to is sturdier than it looks." "You did not have to go out in that storm. They would have survived." "Maybe, but I would have worried. Sometimes you just have to check on the things you care about, even if it means getting wet." She wondered if he was still talking about the horses. The thought made her bold. "Xander, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why did you really come to Casa Grande? You said you were looking for work, but there are bigger towns with more opportunities. Why here?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the coffee in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "I was tired of moving, tired of not having a place to call home. I thought maybe if I found a small town, somewhere quiet, I could figure out what I wanted from life. And then I met you, and suddenly that question seemed a lot more complicated." "What do you mean?" He looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I mean that I came here looking for a place to rest, and instead I found something worth staying for. I know it is too soon. I know you are still dealing with what your husband did. But I need you to know that I am not like him. I do not chase dreams of gold or fortune. I believe in building something real, something that lasts. And if you ever decided you could trust me, could see me as more than just a boarder, I would spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." The confession left Penelope speechless. She had known something was developing between them, but hearing him state it so plainly, with such raw honesty, shook her to her core. She wanted to tell him she felt the same way, that she thought about him constantly, that she had started to see him not as Thomas's replacement, but as something entirely new and better. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with fear and doubt, and the lingering pain of betrayal. "I do not know what to say," she whispered finally. "You do not have to say anything right now," Xander said gently. "I just needed you to know where I stand. The rest is up to you, and I will respect whatever you decide." He stood up, set his empty mug on the table, and headed toward his room. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. "For what it is worth, I think your husband was the biggest fool I have ever heard of. You have found something worth more than all his gold could ever buy. I just hope someday you will see that too." Then he was gone, leaving Penelope alone with her racing thoughts and pounding heart. She sat there for a long time, listening to the storm slowly fade, feeling the foundations of her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. She had been so focused on survival, on getting through each day, that she had not let herself consider the possibility of something more. But Xander had forced her to confront it, and now that it was out in the open, she could not ignore it anymore. That night, she lay in bed and allowed herself to think about what it might be like to let him in, to open her heart again despite the risk. Thomas had left her for gold, chasing a dream that mattered more to him than their marriage. But Xander was different. He had looked at her like she was the treasure, like she was worth more than anything else he might find. The difference was profound, and it terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed through during the night. Penelope rose early and made breakfast, her mind still churning from the previous evening's conversation. When Xander emerged from his room, there was a slight awkwardness between them, a new awareness that made every interaction feel weighted with significance. "About last night," she started, but he held up a hand. "You do not need to say anything," he said. "I put you in an uncomfortable position, and I apologize for that. Let us just go back to how things were." "But that is the thing," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I do not think I want to go back. I just need time to figure out what forward looks like." A slow smile spread across his face, genuine and warm. "Time I can give you. I am not going anywhere." The promise settled something inside her, and she found herself smiling back. They ate breakfast with less awkwardness, falling back into their comfortable pattern, but now there was an undercurrent of possibility that made everything feel new and exciting. Over the following weeks, their relationship shifted in subtle but significant ways. They talked more, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Xander told her about growing up on the farm in Kansas, about the hard work and the simple pleasures of that life. He spoke with affection about his parents, especially his mother, who had taught him to read and instilled in him a sense of honor that he carried with him still. Penelope, in turn, opened up about her own childhood, about her difficult relationship with her father and the loneliness she had felt in her marriage long before Thomas left. They discovered shared interests. Both loved to read, though books were precious and hard to come by. Xander borrowed a worn copy of Ivanhoe from the ranch foreman, and they took turns reading passages aloud to each other in the evenings. Penelope had a collection of poetry that had belonged to her mother, and she shared her favorites with him, watching his face as he listened to the words. The physical attraction between them grew harder to ignore. Penelope found herself noticing things about Xander she had not allowed herself to see before. The way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy. The rare but devastating impact of his full smile. The gentleness of his hands despite their obvious strength. She caught him watching her too, his gaze lingering on her face or the curve of her neck before he quickly looked away. They were careful not to touch more than was necessary, both aware that crossing that line would change everything. But the tension built like a gathering storm, inevitable and electric. In late November, Xander came home with news. The ranch foreman had offered him a permanent position, one that came with better pay and the possibility of advancement. It meant he would be staying in Casa Grande indefinitely, putting down roots for the first time in years. "What did you tell him?" Penelope asked, her heart in her throat. "I told him I would think about it. I wanted to talk to you first." "Why?" "Because if I take this job, I am committing to staying here. And before I do that, I need to know if there is a reason to stay beyond just the work." The directness of the question forced her to confront what she had been dancing around for weeks. She looked at Xander, really looked at him, and saw a man who was everything Thomas had not been. Steady, honest, present. A man who saw her not as an accessory to his dreams, but as the dream itself. "There is a reason," she said quietly. "If you want there to be." The joy that lit up his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "Are you sure? I do not want to push you into anything you are not ready for." "I am not saying I am ready for everything," she admitted. "My marriage only ended a few months ago, and I am still sorting through all the feelings that comes with. But I know what I feel when I am with you. I know that you make me happier than I have been in years, and I know that I do not want you to leave." Xander crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm and calloused, and she leaned into the touch without thinking. "I am going to kiss you now if that is all right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," she breathed. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. But then Penelope's hands came up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of all the longing and need they had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the first day I saw you," he confessed. "Really? Even when I looked like a mess and was barely holding myself together?" "Especially then. You were the strongest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen." She laughed, a sound of pure happiness that surprised them both. "You are either a liar or crazy." "Neither, just a man who knows treasure when he sees it." They kissed again, and this time there was less restraint, more passion. Penelope felt years of loneliness and disappointment melting away, replaced by something bright and new and terrifying in its intensity. When they finally pulled apart, she was flushed and trembling. "We should take this slow," she said, though her body was arguing otherwise. "As slow as you need," Xander agreed. "I am not going anywhere." He took the job at the ranch, and their courtship began in earnest. It was the talk of Casa Grande, of course, the abandoned wife and her handsome boarder. Penelope heard the whispers and saw the judgmental looks, but for the first time in her life, she did not care what other people thought. She had spent years living according to everyone else's expectations, and where had it gotten her? Abandoned and alone. Now she was choosing her own path, and if that path led to Xander, then she would walk it with her head held high. They still maintained separate bedrooms, mindful of both propriety and Penelope's need to move at her own pace. But they spent every possible moment together. Xander taught her to ride properly, taking her out into the desert on Sunday afternoons when neither of them had to work. Penelope packed lunches, and they would find a shady spot beneath a palo verde tree and talk for hours, sharing dreams and fears and everything in between. On one of these rides, in mid-December, they came across an old adobe mission that had been abandoned years before. The walls were crumbling, and the roof had partially collapsed. But there was something beautiful about the ruins, a testament to the people who had built them and the faith that had sustained them. They dismounted and explored the structure, careful of loose stones and unstable walls. In what had once been the main chapel, a single wall still stood intact, decorated with faded murals of saints and angels. Penelope ran her fingers over the ancient artwork, feeling connected to something larger than herself. "Do you believe in God?" she asked Xander suddenly. He considered the question seriously. "I believe in something. I have seen too much beauty in this world, felt too much grace, to think it is all just chance. What about you?" "I used to. I prayed every night when Thomas first left, asking God to bring him back, or to at least tell me what I did wrong. But the only answer I got was silence. Then you showed up, and I started to think maybe God works in strange ways. Maybe the answer to my prayer was not getting Thomas back, but getting something better." Xander stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "I am not a religious man, but if there is a God, I thank him every day for bringing me to your door." She turned to face him fully, her back against the painted wall. "Xander, I need to tell you something. I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since the beginning, but I was too scared and hurt to admit it. I do not want to be scared anymore." His eyes widened, and then he was kissing her again, deep and claiming, his hands tangling in her hair. When he pulled back, his voice was hoarse. "I love you too. I have loved you for so long I cannot remember what it felt like not to." They stood there in the ruins of the old mission, holding each other as the afternoon sun painted the desert in shades of gold and amber. Penelope felt a sense of rightness settle over her, a certainty that this was where she was meant to be, with this man, in this moment. All the pain and betrayal of the past few months had led her here, and she would not change a single thing if it meant losing this feeling. As winter deepened, their love grew stronger. Xander began making small improvements around the house, fixing things that had been broken for years. He replaced the rotting boards on the porch, patched the roof, and built a proper door for the lean-to better protect the horses from the cold. Penelope watched him work, marveling at the care he took with everything he did. Thomas had always been full of grand plans, but short on follow-through. Xander was the opposite. He did not talk about what he was going to do. He simply did it, one steady step at a time. In January, on a crisp morning, when frost painted the desert in silver, Xander asked Penelope to take a walk with him. They bundled up against the cold and headed out toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert. He led her to a small rise that overlooked the valley, where you could see for miles in every direction. "I have been thinking about the future," he said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air, "about what I want and where I am going, and every thought leads back to you." Penelope's heart began to race. "Xander, what are you saying?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I am saying that I want to build a life with you. I know you are still technically married, at least until you can get a divorce, and I know that might take time. But when you are free, when it is legal and proper, I want to marry you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a home with you, maybe have children if that is something you want. I want to give you everything your first husband never did, everything you deserve." Tears streamed down Penelope's face, freezing on her cheeks in the cold. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes to all of it. I want that too, more than anything." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, but she did not care. This was what she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. Not wealth or status or grand adventures, but this simple, profound connection with another human being. Someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway. Someone who chose her every single day. "There is one problem," she said when they finally pulled apart. "I do not know how to get a divorce. I do not even know where Thomas is or how to contact him." "We will figure it out," Xander assured her. "There are lawyers in Tucson who handle these things. It might take time and money, but we will make it happen. I am not going anywhere, Penelope. However long it takes, I will wait for you." They walked back to town hand in hand, making plans and dreaming about their future together. The path ahead would not be easy. Divorce was still relatively rare and carried a social stigma, especially for women. But Penelope had already weathered the worst of the gossip and judgment. She had survived being abandoned, had built a new life from nothing. She could handle whatever came next as long as Xander was beside her. The process of obtaining a divorce proved even more complicated than they had anticipated. Penelope had to travel to Tucson to meet with a lawyer, a stern-faced man named Mr. Garrett, who listened to her story with professional detachment. He explained that she would need to prove desertion, which required evidence that Thomas had been gone for a specific period and had no intention of returning. The letter he had sent would help, but it would be better if she could locate him and have him sign papers agreeing to the divorce. "Do you have any idea where he might be?" Mr. Garrett asked. His letter mentioned Phoenix, but that was months ago. He could be anywhere by now. I can hire a man to track him down, but it will cost extra. The fees were staggering, far more than Penelope had saved, but Xander insisted on contributing, pooling his wages with hers to pay for the lawyer and the investigator. It felt wrong to take his money for something that was her burden, but he would not hear of it. "Your problems are my problems now," he said firmly. "That is what it means to be partners. We face things together." The investigator found Thomas in late February, living in a fancy hotel in Phoenix with his saloon girl. He had spent most of his gold on gambling and expensive clothes, trying to play the part of a wealthy man. According to the investigator's report, the saloon girl was already losing interest, having found a newer, richer mark. Thomas's fortunes were declining rapidly. When presented with divorce papers, Thomas signed them without protest. He even sent a short note to Penelope, though she almost wished he had not. It was full of self-pity and regret, claiming he had made a terrible mistake and asking if there was any way she could forgive him. She read it once, then burned it in the stove, watching the paper curl and blacken. That chapter of her life was over, and she refused to let him drag her back into it. The divorce was finalized in April 1884, 7 months after Thomas had first left. Penelope stood in the Tucson courthouse, listening to the judge pronounce the dissolution of her marriage, and felt nothing but relief. When she walked out into the sunshine, Xander was waiting for her on the courthouse steps, hat in hand, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. "Well?" he asked. "It is done. I am free." He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. "Then I have a question to ask you, and I want to do it proper. To her shock, he dropped to one knee right there on the courthouse steps, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. From his pocket, he pulled out a ring. It was simple, just a slim gold band with a small garnet stone, but it was the most beautiful thing Penelope had ever seen. Penelope Richardson, you are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You have made me believe in things I thought I had lost forever, things like home and family and forever. Will you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife? She dropped to her knees in front of him, not caring about her dress or dignity. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. They kissed there on the courthouse steps, and the few people who had stopped to watch actually applauded. It was scandalous and improper, and absolutely perfect. They were married 2 weeks later in the same courthouse, with Mrs. Chen and the ranch foreman as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate church wedding Penelope had had with Thomas, but it meant so much more. When Xander took her hands and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his life, she believed him completely. When she made the same promises back, she meant every word. The wedding night was both nerve-wracking and wonderful. They had waited so long, through so many months of wanting and restraint, that finally being able to express their love fully was almost overwhelming. Xander was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Penelope felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they would now share every night, she felt a completeness she had never experienced before. "Are you happy?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Happier than I knew was possible," she said honestly. "Sometimes I think I should feel guilty about that. My first marriage ended less than a year ago. Should I not still be mourning it?" "You cannot mourn something that was already dead," Xander said wisely. "Your marriage to Thomas was over long before he left. You were just the only one trying to keep it alive. There is no shame in being happy now, in choosing a different path. How did you get so wise?" "Years of making mistakes and learning from them. Plus, my mother used to say that life was too short to waste on regrets. She said you had to grab happiness with both hands whenever you found it, because it did not come along that often. I like your mother. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you. She always said I needed to find a woman with some spine, someone who would not let me get away with being lazy or foolish. You fit that description perfectly." Penelope laughed and swatted his chest playfully. They stayed up late into the night, talking and making love and planning their future. Xander wanted to save up and buy a small piece of land where they could build a real home and maybe run a few cattle. Penelope loved the idea, could see it clearly in her mind. A house with a porch where they could sit in the evenings, a garden where she could grow vegetables, space for children to run and play. The months that followed were the happiest of Penelope's life. She continued working at the hotel, but now it felt different, like she was working towards something rather than just surviving. Xander's steady income from the ranch combined with her wages allowed them to save a little each month. It was not much, but it added up slowly. In June, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress or the heat, but when she missed a second month and began feeling nauseous in the mornings, she knew. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She wanted a child with Xander desperately, but the memory of her failed first marriage lingered. What if something went wrong? What if Xander changed his mind about wanting a family? She need not have worried. When she told him over dinner one evening, watching his face anxiously for his reaction, he stood up so fast, he nearly knocked over his chair. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got sick. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy about it?" she asked, needing to hear the words. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. Penelope, you have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a wife I love more than life itself, and now a child. I am the luckiest man in the world." His joy was infectious, washing away her fears. They spent the evening making new plans, adjusting their dreams to include the baby. Xander became fiercely protective, insisting she work fewer hours at the hotel and rest more. Mr. Henderson, surprisingly, was understanding, reducing her workload without cutting her pay significantly. Maybe he had a heart after all, buried somewhere beneath the gruff exterior. As Penelope's belly grew, so did their excitement. Xander spent his evenings building a cradle from scrap wood, sanding it smooth and painting it a soft cream color. Penelope sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. Mrs. Chen and the other women from town brought gifts and advice, welcoming her into the community of mothers. In late February 1885, on a cold night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Penelope went into labor. Xander rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Santos, who had delivered half the babies in Casa Grande. The labor was long and hard, lasting nearly 20 hours. Xander stayed by Penelope's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, and whispering encouragement even when she screamed that she hated him for putting her through this. When their son finally emerged, wailing and red-faced and perfect, Penelope burst into tears of relief and joy. Mrs. Santos cleaned the baby and placed him in Penelope's arms, and she stared down at the tiny face in wonder. He had Xander's nose and chin, but his eyes were a blend of both of them, a unique shade of blue-gray. "What should we name him?" Xander asked, his own eyes wet with tears. "I was thinking Samuel," Penelope said. "After my father. I know we had our differences, but I would like to honor his memory. Samuel Novak, I like it. What do you think, little man? Do you like your name?" The baby yawned in response, tiny fingers curling around Penelope's thumb, and they both laughed through their tears. In that moment, holding their son with Xander's arm around her shoulders, Penelope understood what true happiness felt like. Not the temporary thrill of new love or the excitement of a wedding, but this deep, abiding contentment that came from building something real with someone you trusted completely. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Samuel was a good baby, relatively speaking, but he still woke every few hours to nurse, leaving both parents bleary-eyed and stumbling through their days. The house was constantly cluttered with diapers and blankets and all the chaos that came with an infant, but neither of them would have changed a thing. Xander proved to be a devoted father. He would walk the floor with Samuel for hours when the baby was fussy, singing off key lullabies that somehow always did the trick. He changed diapers without complaint and took over the household chores so Penelope could rest when she needed to. Watching him with their son, Penelope fell in love with him all over again. As Samuel grew, so did their lives. Xander received another promotion at the ranch, this time to assistant foreman, which came with a significant pay increase. They were finally able to start seriously saving for the land they wanted. By Samuel's first birthday, they had enough for a down payment on 20 acres just outside of town, complete with a small but sturdy house and a barn. Moving into their own home felt like the final piece falling into place. It was not much by some standards, just a simple 2-bedroom house with whitewashed walls and a tin roof. But it was theirs, bought with money they had earned together, built on a foundation of love and hard work. Penelope planted a garden and tended it carefully, growing tomatoes and peppers and beans. Xander fixed up the barn and bought a few head of cattle, starting the small ranching operation he had always dreamed of. They worked hard, both of them from sunrise to sunset most days. But it never felt like a burden because they were working towards something they both believed in. On Sundays, they would hitch up the wagon and drive into Casa Grande for church. Penelope had returned to her faith after Samuel was born, finding in it a sense of peace and gratitude she had lacked before. Xander attended with her, not because he was particularly religious, but because it made her happy, and he liked the sense of community it provided. One Sunday after church, as they were preparing to leave, a man approached them in the churchyard. He was well-dressed but worn-looking, with eyes that held a desperate sort of sadness. It took Penelope a moment to recognize him, and when she did, her blood ran cold. It was Thomas. He looked terrible despite the expensive clothes. His face was haggard, his hands shaking slightly. The confident charm he had once possessed was gone, replaced by something hollow and broken. "Penelope," he said, his voice rough. "I need to talk to you. Please." Xander immediately stepped between them, his posture protective. "I do not think that is a good idea. You need to leave now." "Just 5 minutes," Thomas pleaded, looking past Xander to Penelope. "That is all I am asking, 5 minutes to say what I came here to say." Penelope felt Xander tense beside her, ready to physically remove Thomas if necessary. She put a hand on his arm, calming him. "It is all right. Let him talk. Are you sure? Xander asked quietly. I am sure. He cannot hurt me anymore. He has no power over me. They stepped slightly away from the church, giving Thomas his 5 minutes, while Xander stood close by with Samuel in his arms, watching carefully. Thomas looked at her with haunted eyes. You look good, happy. I heard you remarried and had a baby. What do you want, Thomas? I wanted to apologize, and to tell you that you were right about everything. The gold is gone. Delilah left me the moment my money ran out. I have nothing left except debts and regrets. He laughed bitterly. I had everything when I had you, and I was too stupid to see it. I threw away something real and precious for a fantasy. Yes, you did, Penelope said calmly. But that was your choice, and you have to live with the consequences. I know. I just needed you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry. You deserve so much better than what I gave you. You are right, I did, and I found it. She looked back at Xander and Samuel, her heart swelling with love. I found something worth more than all your gold could ever buy. I found a man who values me, who chooses me every single day, who built a life with me instead of chasing illusions. So, thank you, in a way, for leaving. You freed me to find real happiness. Thomas flinched as if she had struck him. I suppose I deserved that. You did. Now go, Thomas. Build a new life somewhere else. Learn from your mistakes. But do not come back here expecting forgiveness or reconciliation. That chapter is closed. He nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging in defeat. Goodbye, Penelope. I hope your life is everything mine was not. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the Arizona heat, and felt nothing but pity. He had chased gold and lost everything. She had been abandoned and found treasure. The irony was not lost on her. Xander came to her side, Samuel babbling happily in his arms. Are you all right? I am perfect, she said, meaning it completely. Let us go home. They drove back to their little ranch, Samuel falling asleep in Penelope's arms as the wagon rattled over the dusty roads. Xander reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. No words were necessary. Everything they needed to say to each other was communicated in that simple touch. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy, with his father's steady temperament and his mother's determination. When he was 3, Penelope became pregnant again, this time with twin girls they named Grace and Rose. The house that had once felt spacious suddenly seemed very small, with 3 young children running through it. But somehow they made it work. Xander expanded the ranch gradually, buying more cattle and eventually a few horses that he trained and sold for extra income. Penelope started a small business, selling her preserves and baked goods at the general store in town. Between the ranch, the children, and their various enterprises, there was never a dull moment. But there was also never a moment when Penelope did not feel grateful for the life she had built. They had their struggles, of course. There were years when drought made ranching difficult, when money was tight and they had to make hard choices. There were illnesses that kept them up at night with worry and arguments about how to handle various challenges. But through it all, they faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander surprised Penelope by taking her back to the old mission where they had first confessed their love. The ruins had deteriorated further over the years, but the wall with the painted saints still stood, faded but enduring. They stood there hand in hand, remembering the people they had been a decade earlier. Do you ever regret it? Xander asked. This life we have built? I know it is not easy, and I have not made you rich or given you a life of leisure. Penelope turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. You have given me everything that matters, a home, a family, love that never wavers. I would not trade this life for all the gold in California, all the wealth in the world. You told me once that I had found something worth more than gold, and you were right. I found you. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, with all the passion of their first kiss, but the confidence of 10 years of marriage. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. I love you, Penelope Novak. I have loved you from the moment I knocked on your door, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. They stayed at the mission until the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Then they rode back to their ranch, back to their children and their life, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Samuel grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with aspirations to expand the ranch even further. The twins, Grace and Rose, were 12 now, helping their mother with the cooking and the garden and driving their brothers crazy with their constant chatter and schemes. Yes, brothers. After the twins had come another son, James, who at age 8 was already showing signs of being the troublemaker of the family. The ranch had grown too, now spanning nearly 100 acres with a substantial herd of cattle and horses. Xander had proven to have a gift for horse training, and their animals were sought after throughout the territory. They had hired on 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who looked at Xander with respect and admiration, seeing in him the kind of man they hoped to become. Penelope, now in her early 40s, still worked hard every day, but she had learned to pace herself better, to take moments of rest and appreciation. She would stand on the porch in the evenings, watching her family, and marvel at how far she had come from that terrified, abandoned woman who had opened her door to a stranger 13 years ago. Sometimes she thought about Thomas, wondered what had become of him. She had heard rumors over the years that he had moved to California, that he was working as a clerk again, that he had married and divorced again. But the details did not matter. He was a ghost from another life, one that felt more like a story she had heard than something she had actually lived through. One evening in late spring, as the desert was coming alive with wildflowers, Xander found Penelope sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. He settled down beside her with a contented sigh, his body showing the wear of years of hard labor, but still strong and capable. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, taking her hand. "Everything. Nothing. Just feeling grateful, I suppose." "Grateful for what?" "For all of it. For you, for our children, for this life we have built together. Do you remember that day you knocked on my door, looking for a room to rent?" "Of course I do. I was travel-worn and tired, and you looked like you were barely holding yourself together. But there was something in your eyes, a strength that had not been broken despite everything you had been through. I knew right then that you were special. I was so scared to let you in, scared of what people would think, scared of being hurt again, scared of everything. And now I am not scared anymore. You taught me that. You showed me that real love is not about fear or possession or trying to turn someone into what you want them to be. It is about seeing someone exactly as they are and choosing them anyway, every single day." Xander brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You taught me some things too. You taught me that home is not a place, it is a person. You taught me that the greatest treasure a man can have is not gold or land or fame, but a partner who stands beside him through everything. You taught me what it means to truly love someone." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. From inside the house, they could hear the children laughing about something, the sound warm and familiar. "Do you think they understand how lucky they are?" Penelope asked. "Growing up with parents who actually love each other, in a home filled with stability and affection?" "Probably not yet. That is something you only appreciate when you are older and have seen how rare it really is. But they will understand someday, and then they will carry it forward to their own families." "I hope so. I hope we have given them a good foundation." "We have. Look at them, Penelope. They are happy, healthy, confident kids. They know they are loved. That is the greatest gift parents can give." Samuel came out onto the porch, now 19, and looking more like his father every day. "Ma, Pa, dinner is ready. Grace and Rose cooked, so it is actually edible this time." "I heard that!" Grace shouted from inside, and Samuel laughed, ducking back through the door. Xander stood and offered Penelope his hand, pulling her up. "Come on, Mrs. Novak. Our family awaits." She took his hand, this man who had been a stranger once, and was now the center of her entire world. Together, they walked inside to the dinner table, where their children were already gathered, arguing playfully about who should say grace. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not always easy, but real and true and worth more than anything else in the world. That night, after the children were all in bed and the house was quiet, Penelope and Xander lay together in their bedroom, the window open to let in the cool desert breeze. Xander's arm was around her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Xander," she said softly, Thank you for finding me. Thank you for seeing something worth staying for when I could not see it myself. He tightened his arm around her. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter with nothing but a couple of horses and a dream. Thank you for building this life with me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I. Every single day, I would choose you all over again. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the cool breeze carrying the scent of sage and desert flowers through the window. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, constant and eternal, watching over the little ranch where a woman who had lost everything had found something infinitely more valuable. The seasons continued their endless cycle. Summers blazed hot and bright, the land baking under the relentless Arizona sun. Winters brought cold nights and occasionally even frost, though snow was rare at their elevation. Through it all, the Novak family thrived. They worked hard, loved deeply, and built something that would last for generations. Samuel eventually married a girl from town, a smart young woman named Catherine, who fit into the family seamlessly. They built a house on the far edge of the property and started their own family, giving Penelope and Xander their first grandchildren. Grace and Rose both developed into strong, independent young women. Grace showed an aptitude for business and began helping Penelope expand her preserves operation, while Rose discovered a talent for working with horses, learning everything she could from her father. James, true to form, was the wild one. He got into scrapes and adventures, testing his parents' patience regularly. But he had a good heart underneath the mischief, and both Penelope and Xander knew he would settle down eventually. He just needed to find his purpose first, the thing that would capture his passion and focus his energy. On Penelope's 50th birthday, Xander threw her a surprise party. It seemed like the entire town of Casa Grande showed up, crowding into their house and spilling out onto the porch and yard. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Penelope stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and affection from their community. These were the same people who had gossiped about her when she took in a male boarder so soon after her husband left. The same people who had whispered about her divorce and judged her quick remarriage. But she had won them over through years of hard work, integrity, and kindness. She was no longer the abandoned wife or the scandalous divorcee. She was Mrs. Novak, a respected member of the community, a woman who had overcome hardship and built something admirable. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home and only family remained, Xander pulled Penelope aside. He led her out to the barn, where he had set up a small table with a lamp and 2 chairs. "What is this?" she asked, curious. "I wanted a few minutes alone with you," he said, "away from all the noise and chaos, just the 2 of us." They sat down, and he poured them each a small glass of whiskey. "To 50 years of you," he said, raising his glass. "And to the many more, I hope we get to share together." They clinked glasses and drank. The whiskey burned going down, but it left a pleasant warmth in its wake. "I have something for you," Xander said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound book. "I am not much of a writer, but I wanted to try to put down some of my thoughts and memories. So, you would have them someday, when I am gone." "Do not talk like that," Penelope said, her throat tightening. "You are not going anywhere. We are not getting any younger, love. I just want to make sure you know everything I feel, everything you have meant to me." So, I wrote it down. Stories about us, about our life together, about all the little moments that have meant the most to me. Penelope opened the book with trembling hands. The pages were filled with Xander's careful handwriting, each word chosen with thought and care. She read the first entry, dated from their wedding day, and tears immediately sprang to her eyes. "Today I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known," it read. "She has shown me what courage really means, what strength looks like, what love can be when it is given freely and fully. I promise to spend every day of my life making sure she never regrets choosing me." She looked up at him through her tears. "You have kept that promise. Every single day, you have kept it. And I will keep it until my last breath," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You saved me, Penelope. I was lost before I found you, drifting without purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting. You gave me a home and a family and a life I never thought I could have. Everything good in my life comes from you." "That is not true. You were always a good man, Xander. I just gave you a place to be yourself." We saved each other then. How about that? I can live with that, she said, smiling through her tears. They sat in the barn until the lamp burned low, talking about the past and the future, remembering all the moments that had brought them to this place. When they finally walked back to the house, arm in arm under a sky full of stars, Penelope felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was her life. This was her choice. And she would not change a single thing. Years continued to flow like water, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Grandchildren grew and multiplied. The ranch prospered. Penelope and Xander aged together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminishing. When Penelope was 62, she received word that Thomas had died in California, alone in a boarding house, having never found the happiness he sought. She felt a moment of sadness for the young man she had once loved, for the potential that had been wasted. But mostly she felt grateful that his choices had led her to Xander, to this life, to this family. She told Xander about Thomas's death that evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "I feel sad for him," she admitted. He spent his whole life chasing something he could not catch, when everything he needed was right in front of him all along. But I also feel grateful. If he had not left me, if he had not chosen gold over our marriage, I never would have found you. So, in a strange way, his worst decision led to my greatest blessing. Xander pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. I used to wonder sometimes what I did to get so lucky. Then I realized it was not luck at all. It was you seeing past the dusty drifter at your door to the man underneath. It was you taking a chance when you had every reason not to. It was you being brave enough to love again after being hurt so badly. "We were both brave," Penelope said, "and we were both lucky. Lucky to find each other. Lucky to have had all these years together. And we will have more years still," Xander said firmly. "I am not ready to let you go yet, Mrs. Novak." "Good, because I am not ready to go." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, not riches or glory or adventure, but something simpler and infinitely more precious: love, partnership, home. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house and yard. There was music and laughter, and so much love it seemed to overflow and spill out into the desert itself. Samuel stood up to give a toast, now a middle-aged man himself with silver threading through his dark hair. "I want to say something about my parents," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Growing up, I sometimes took for granted what I was seeing. Two people who truly loved each other, who worked as partners in everything, who showed respect and kindness even when they disagreed. It was not until I was older that I understood how rare that really is." He looked at his own wife and children, then back at Penelope and Xander. "You taught us all what marriage should be. Not perfect, but committed. Not without struggle, but faced together. You showed us that real love is not about grand gestures or passionate declarations. Though those have their place, it is about showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again." He raised his glass. "To Ma and Pa, to 40 years of showing us all how it is done. May we all be lucky enough to find what you have found." The crowd echoed the toast, glasses raised high. Penelope wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the love surrounding her. Xander squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Later, when the party had wound down and only their closest family remained, Penelope and Xander took a walk together around the property. Their steps were slower now, their bodies bearing the weight of years of hard work and good living, but they still fit together perfectly, walking hand in hand just as they had for 4 decades. They stopped at the highest point of their land, where you could see for miles in every direction. The ranch spread out below them, buildings and fences and fields, all testament to what they had built together. In the distance, Casa Grande was visible, grown larger over the years, but still the same small town at heart. "We did pretty well, did we not?" Xander said, his arm around Penelope's waist. "Better than well. We built something lasting, something that will continue long after we are gone. Do you have any regrets?" Penelope thought about the question seriously. Did she regret the years with Thomas, the pain of abandonment, the struggle of those early months alone? In some ways, yes. But those experiences had shaped her, had made her into the woman who could appreciate Xander and build this life with him. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret any of it. Every step, good and bad, led me here, led me to you. How could I regret the path that brought me home?" "That is exactly how I feel," Xander said. "Every dusty trail I rode, every job I took and left, every lonely night under the stars, all of it was leading me to your door that day. And I would walk those same roads 1,000 times if I knew they led to you." They stood together watching the sunset, two people who had found in each other a treasure worth more than any gold. Their love had weathered time and hardship, had grown stronger with each passing year, and would endure as long as there was breath in their bodies and beyond. As the last rays of sunlight painted the desert in shades of amber and rose, Penelope leaned into Xander's embrace and whispered, "Thank you for knocking on my door all those years ago." "Thank you for opening it," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." "Always," she said. "I will always choose you." They walked back to the house together as twilight deepened into night, the lights from their home warm and welcoming. Inside, their family waited. The legacy of their love made manifest in children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. This was what lasted. This was what mattered. Not gold or wealth or status, but love and family and the life you built with someone who saw your worth. Penelope knew that when her time finally came, whenever that might be, she would leave this world with no regrets. She had been abandoned for gold and found something worth far more. She had been broken and rebuilt herself stronger. She had taken a chance on a stranger and discovered her soulmate. She had lived fully and loved completely. And in the end, that was all anyone could really ask for. The years continued, each one a gift. Penelope and Xander grew old together with grace, their love never wavering even as their bodies slowed. They watched their grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. They saw the ranch pass to Samuel's capable hands while still offering their wisdom and experience when asked. They remained partners in every sense of the word, facing each new challenge together, celebrating each victory, mourning each loss. On a warm spring morning, when Penelope was 78 years old and Xander was 83, they sat together on their porch, as they had done countless times before. The desert was alive with blooming wildflowers, painting the landscape in brilliant colors. Birds sang in the mesquite trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage. Xander's health had been declining for the past year, though he never complained. Penelope knew their time together was growing shorter, and the knowledge sat heavy in her chest. But she also knew they had been blessed with more years than many couples received, years filled with love and purpose and joy. "Tell me again," Xander said, his voice softer than it used to be, but still warm with affection. "Tell me about the day we met." Penelope smiled, having told this story hundreds of times to children and grandchildren, but never tiring of it. "It was a Tuesday morning in September, and I had just received the letter from Thomas. I was standing in the doorway, my whole world falling apart, when I saw this tall, dusty cowboy ride up to Mrs. Chen's house. I was looking for a room," Xander prompted, his eyes closed but a slight smile on his face. "You were looking for a room, and Mrs. Chen sent you to me. When you knocked on my door, I almost did not answer. I was so scared and hurt and angry, but something made me open it, and there you were, with your blue eyes and that respectful way you took off your hat. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even with tears on your face and pain in your eyes. You asked for a room, and I said yes, even though I should not have, and that decision changed everything. Best decision either of us ever made. The very best." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the world go by. This was enough. This moment, this connection, this lifetime of love, it was more than enough. It was everything. Xander passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later, with Penelope beside him, holding his hand one last time. The grief was profound, a hole torn in the fabric of her world. But even in her sorrow, she felt gratitude. Gratitude for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. Gratitude that she had known what true love felt like. Gratitude that she had been chosen by such a remarkable man and had chosen him in return. At his funeral, she stood before the gathered crowd and spoke from her heart. "My husband once told me that I had found something worth more than gold," she said, her voice strong despite the tears on her cheeks. "He was right. I found love that never wavered. I found partnership that made me stronger. I found a home in another person's heart. And though he is gone now, that gift remains. It lives on in our children and grandchildren. It lives on in the ranch we built together. It lives on in every lesson he taught me about courage and kindness and choosing love every single day." She touched the simple gravestone, feeling the warmth of the sun-baked stone beneath her palm. "Thank you, my love," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Penelope lived for 7 more years, surrounded by family, still sharp and strong until nearly the end. She spent those years passing down stories, making sure her grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew where they came from, knew about the man who had built this legacy with her. She told them about Thomas and the gold and the abandonment, not to cause pain, but to show them how something terrible could become something beautiful if you were brave enough to take a chance. On her deathbed, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Xander had created, Penelope felt nothing but peace. She had lived a full life, had loved and been loved in return, had left the world better than she found it. As her breathing grew shallow and the room began to fade, her last conscious thought was of Xander, waiting for her somewhere beyond, ready to take her hand once more. The story of Penelope and Xander became family legend, passed down through the generations. The ranch remained in the family for over 100 years, a testament to what they had built. And whenever someone asked about the founders, about how it all began, they would hear the tale of a woman abandoned for gold and a cowboy who showed her that she had found something worth far more.